everybody. Welcome to our last Econfin seminar this term. We have two very well-known speakers tonight. Mr. Soli Özel is an international politics expert, while Murat Sağman is an international economics and finance expert. So what we would like to do, we would like to hear their views in their own fields. We would like to start with Mr. Soli Özel, and we would like to have his view on the transition from Trump to Biden, and in a broad context, how do you see their impact on the global economy, but more specifically, the US and Turkish relationship? After that, I would like to have the view of Sağman on the economics, and then we can have some questions. Altogether, we have an hour, and because Mr. Özel has a meeting afterwards, so we'll try to make it tight. So please, sorry, Mr. Özel, I would like to have you.
Sure. Thank you, Burak Hoca. Hello, everyone. I never thought I would use the adjective Gazi for Boğaziçi University, but I suppose that's what you are now. Last week was a historical week in terms of American history. You could look at it from different perspectives, and one of which would be, okay, Schadenfreude, the Americans are now paying for what they've done to everyone and all that, and how Americans were shocked that their country was subjected to, the definitions are being contested left and right, whether it was a push, it was an insurrection, it was this, it was that. But the fact remains that the President of the United States actually encouraged a mob to go and attack the seat of American democracy, the Capitol where Congress is, and wanted to delay, at least delay, if not cancel, the approval of the Electoral College's vote on who the next president and the vice president would be. So on the one hand, this was a very traumatic event, and the views differ. Some think that this will continue. Others believe that this will be the beginning of the end for Trumpism, in that with that kind of a radical move, a lot of people who did not take the threat of Trumpism seriously would finally come back to their senses. Institutions, rules, regulations, norms would again attain the importance that they deserved in the running of a democratic country. But most importantly, perhaps, this event finally paid put to the illusion, ideology, belief, dream, whatever, idea of American exceptionalism. It has proven that America is not exceptional. And secondly, and that's from a friend of mine, maybe it relieved the United States from the burden of self-consideration as an exceptional country. They're normal, and maybe they should treat themselves the same way as well. And secondly, the depth of the trauma was such that the United States, every time it is hit by such events that they don't believe fits their image, the answer is, as the President-elect Biden said in his intervention during the attack, this is not us. This is not who we are. In Turkey, we're also very familiar with this. This is not who we are. Well, the thing is, again, we've learned more about American history this year than anybody actually wanted to, because about their electoral system, about the way it functions and stuff. It is a violent country. It has a population of 330 million, and it has more than 330 million guns of all sizes, of all kinds, distributed in its population. So violence has been a part of the American experience, and therefore this riot, except for which place was attacked, was not necessarily something that you wouldn't expect happening in the US. Moreover, the trials for that have already begun in the summer, when militias, again, with the encouragement of Trump, have actually attacked the Capitol building in the state of Michigan and wanted to personally attack and probably harm the governor of Michigan. Anyway, the thing is, Trump is now going out with a bang. The new president is going to be sworn in about 9 days. Currently, the debate is, should Trump resign or should it be impeached? It would be very difficult to get the US Senate to actually accept an impeachment of the president that the House might rush in. And it looks that Vice President Pence and at least half of the cabinet are not necessarily willing to implement the 25th Amendment to the US Constitution, which suggests that if a president is deemed incapacitated, then he is replaced by the vice president until the term ends. That is not likely to happen either. So we'll see. And I understand, again, this is out of a conversation with a constitutional scholar friend of mine yesterday. If the House sends the impeachment decision to the Senate cannot really start debating it before the 19th. Apparently, it can go on after the inauguration. Whether or not Joe Biden will want his administration to be burdened with this remains to be seen. But we'll witness these things, and I don't need to dwell on it. So does the election of Joe Biden as president of the United States with Kamala Harris, a woman who is half Indian and half Caribbean, therefore triple indemnity, if you will, is that administration going to make a difference in the way the United States relates to the rest of the world and in the way the United States is governed? Is the election of Biden, who spent his very long and actually distinguished political career as a mainly middle-of-the-road politician with no radical views on how the governance of the United States ought to function, will he actually be able to terminate what even the founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, said it's the end of neoliberalism? And will he be able to bring in a different approach to the political economy of the United States? Murat can speak more authoritatively to that. But it is my view that Trump was an important wake-up call for Americans, for the American elites. Whether or not they heard the alarm or are sleeping through it remains to be seen. The attack on the Capitol was indeed a traumatic event that should, under normal circumstances, serve as an inflection point in American political history. But I do expect that Biden will be acting both in his domestic political economy and in terms of his political preferences much more radically than he might have thought he would a year ago, definitely 5 years ago. In spite of the fact that many of the people he has nominated to serve in his government are veterans of the Obama administration, I expect the Biden administration to be domestically much more in tune with green policies, with fiscal expansion, with investment in infrastructure. And all of those are not just economic policies. They are policies that will have serious political consequences and implications. Research suggests that where populist rage is higher, wherever the populist rage is dominant, if economic conditions start getting better, the temperature goes down. Populism is not just a function of economic inequality, but economic inequality the prospects of a no-end life, the prospects of losing your status, those all contribute to the rage that drives populist politics. There is also a cultural aspect to it, but it will be important that the life conditions, life expectations, hopes of the losers of globalization are bettered, and that will be the task, the political task, not just the economic task of the Biden administration. Secondly, and this might turn out to be a lot harder, Biden will be burdened with reestablishing, in fact, restructuring or rebuilding American prestige in a world that is scornful of the United States these days. Trump was a joker. Trump caused a wave of mistrust in the United States because he reneged on agreements that the previous administration had actually signed into. He did not respect the rules of the international system that the United States itself had actually set up. He mistreated allies. He tried to break the European Union. He basically ran the country as if it was a protection racket by asking Japan and South Korea to pay up for the protection that the United States was extending to them against North Korea, against China, and what have you. So it will be a massive task on the part of the Biden administration to reestablish trust in America's relations with its allies. It will be a tough task to rehabilitate transatlantic relations, to make NATO more functional, to actually make the Asian allies trust the United States and its commitments to their security. But that is what is at stake for the United States. Much as I dislike, in fact, I actually despise Trump, and much as I think that he's been a disaster, I have to give him credit personally that he has actually highlighted a lot of things that were wrong with the United States through both positive and negative actions. Without him, let's say if Hillary Clinton got elected, the dysfunctionalism in the United States, in the American system, would not be as visible as it was, and we would have ended perhaps in 2020 with even a worse type of radical right-leaning leader. He also managed to actually concentrate American foreign and security policy elites' focus on the rising challenge of China. 40 years ago, in 1980, every fifth person living in the world was a Chinese person. And China's economy at that time was anywhere between 1 and 1.5% of the world economy. 40 years later, every fifth person in the world is still Chinese, but the Chinese economy is about 16% of the world economy. And probably within 2 or 3 years, it will become the world's largest economy. That kind of massive economic power shift cannot be not accompanied by a shift in strategic power. And since Xi Jinping assumed power in China, China has become much more assertive, in fact, aggressive, and its policies have been geared to actually keep the United States out of Asia Pacific, which, using a terminology that Russians used to be using, in its near abroad, China does not wish to see American presence. So the next 10 years we will witness the contestation between a rising China, which is much more assertive about its interests and its hegemonic aspirations, and a United States which is both an Atlantic and a Pacific power, trying to contain balance and manage China's rise. So to a certain extent, I think this year is the beginning of a period of reconstructing the world order and finding a new strategic equilibrium. So in what ways will the new administration's policies affect Turkey's allies in Europe and Turkey itself? As I said earlier, it is pretty obvious, he declared it, he said so, and the choices that he made in his cabinet suggest that Joe Biden's first priority in foreign policy, a parenthesis, Joe Biden's main concern, the most important item on his agenda will not be foreign policy, cannot be foreign policy. The country is in the depth of a recession. 270,000 people died because of a pandemic that was criminally mismanaged by the Trump administration. It's a polarized country. A lot of, I'm sure Murat will talk about this, that everybody expects a sharp rise in economic activity this year, but it needs to be managed well. Anyway, but be that as it may, in foreign policy, what Biden will try to do is America is relatively weaker today, and it has to actually rise to the challenge of China. It is incumbent on the United States to make sure that it has its allies behind it. And therefore, repairing relations with the allies in Europe and in Asia is going to be pretty important, and that is a priority for the Biden administration. Secondly, for the Biden administration to actually dissociate itself from the Trump administration, it will have to be investing more on America's democratic credentials. Now, with a coup attempt instigated by the President of the United States, it will be a difficult task, but that's what they will have to do. Secondly, in order to distinguish the United States from China, which claims that its system under the leadership of the Communist Party, a system that does not allow much freedom of expression and all that, is superior to the democratic system of the United States, that will have to be challenged. Therefore, America's credentials as a country that is democratic and that supports democratic governments elsewhere in the world will have to be reinvested in. So ideologically, that will be part of his challenge. Thirdly, in Europe, Biden will stop the Trump administration's policy of dividing the European Union, seeing the European Union as an enemy, and will now invest in relations, particularly with Berlin, but with the two major powers in continental Europe that are France and Germany, and collaborate with them in strengthening the Atlantic Alliance and redefining NATO's purpose. If all these are things that the Biden administration would do, I surmise that Turkey would be under a lot of pressure to, number one, not be a gadfly within NATO, to have civil relations with its allies in Europe, and we're already seeing how our government is actually moving in that direction. And thirdly, I would think there would be pressure on Turkey to actually get its act together for its domestic order. For the moment, our love for the European Union is rekindled. It is being repeated on every occasion. Our desire or our connectivity to the Americans and to the way the Turkish president had actually associated with the American president-elect before, all of those are being played out. There is not a single day when our defense minister does not invoke the fact that Turkey is a NATO member and it will not actually give up on NATO and all that. Well, what is happening domestically, and you are of course witnesses to that as students of Boğaziçi University, does not correspond to the picture that I tried to describe for you. But you never know, because if Turkey's strategic importance is deemed again so very important, its domestic frailties may not actually draw much attention, or they may not actually engender too much pressure on Turkey. That actually remains to be seen. But, and I'll finish with this, you've got to do something with S-400s. I don't know what formula the government will find, what gestures it will make, but without solving or without coming to an agreement with the American administration on the future of S-400s, it would be very difficult to put American-Turkish relations back on track. You may ask, I'm sorry, this will be my final last point. You may ask, do we have to be in good terms with the United States? No country has to do anything. But when you are a resource-poor country which has been fairly badly mismanaged in the past few years, and your resources are no longer sufficient for you to actually act on your own, you have to act. If the United States needs to get in better terms with its allies, I think Turkey needs to get in better terms with its allies. You can say then, okay, why don't we pick China and Russia as our allies? I'll leave you with that question. Can Russia and China carry the burden of Turkey? And will Turkey be better off outside the Atlantic Alliance than inside the Atlantic Alliance? And if you have questions on that, we'll debate it afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Özel. In a very short but very clear and very thoughtful summary of US and Turkey in such a short time, it was very impressive. And now I would like to have more or less the same view, but from an economics and finance point of view, how that transition would work globally and then gradually to Turkish economy and impact on us. Murat, thank you.
Thank you, Burak Hoca. Thank you, Soli Özel, for a very great presentation. And I'm completely agree with you. Last week was a very historical week for US and for Boğaziçi also. I will add that. And okay, I took some notes about what you said, and after my presentation, it will take like 15 minutes. My first question to Soli Özel will be how we're gonna solve the S-400. What is its solutions? Okay, it will be my question, because all the US and Turkey relation will depend on that. I completely agree with you. And what he said about US economics, and I take my notes and I'm gonna add on that. For Biden, he said he's gonna go in a fiscal expansion, and I'm agreeing with that, because not the central bank, because the central bank has gone to more than $7 trillion of expansion. But I think now we have the Senate and the House into the Democrats. I think they're gonna continue the fiscal expansions. The second, the green, of course, the green economy and the infrastructure expands. For US, we're having very bad numbers economically. We had a very bad non-farm payrolls last week. Maybe Burak Hoca, you followed, minus 140,000. It was a very bad number, and the unemployment is at 6.7%. I think the first task for Biden will be, of course, the COVID, and the second task will be unemployment. And of course, after solving all these problems, it will come to Russia, China, and probably to Turkey. For just some words about the US and Europe, and I will go to Turkey. And I think what we see, it's the separation of legislative and executive in the US. and it was a very bad week. But at the end, I think after 20th of January, we're gonna start a new period. But the task is not easy. Biden will have a lot of difficulty to solve the economic problems. My expectation is a very bad first quarter, first quarter in recession, mild the second quarter, and very expansion and very good second half of this year. And means we're gonna have a fiscal expansions, and we're gonna have a very good demand second half of the year, and probably we're gonna start to have inflation, and it's gonna be a new thing for the US. Maybe, I don't know if you follow the central bank, the target was 2%, but in the last two meetings, Jerome Powell said it's okay with 2%, but we can go to 2.3%, or we can go to 2.5%. And I think they're gonna let the inflation's coming and maybe start to increase the interest rate. The market expectation is 2023, but if we have a very good expansion and very good recovery in the second half of this year, maybe we can have an earlier interest rate increase in the US. If I come to Turkey, I just put some positive and negatives for Turkey for 2021. I start with potential positives. Still accommodative US policies and European central banks, and a lot of liquidity, and I think they start to come to Turkey. Last year until beginning of November, we had that $14 billion withdrawal from Turkish market, and the last 2 months we got back $4 billion. The reason, of course, it's a change, like a supportive rule-based economic market policies. Of course, a new finance minister and new central bank governor doing more orthodox things that the market wanted. Of course, like dear Soli Özel said, there's a lot of talking about Europe, a lot of talking about NATO, and I completely agree with him that there's a different action internationally and domestically. And I think Boğaziçi is the university that they can agree with me. The most important things from now on is, of course, the structural reforms, but it's the acting is gonna be very important, especially for 2021, starting with the judiciary decisions. Better relation with Europe and US, it's a must for this year, because if I'm coming to some potential negatives, I can tell you the high level of real sector debt for this year. The debt sector for real sector and for government, the total, we need to repay $180 billion for 2021. And if I add to this the $35 billion of current account deficit that we had the number today, it's make more than $215 billion that we have to fund this year in US dollar terms. Another problem, and I'm sure Burak Hoca is mentioning also the problem, is the low central bank reserves. If you take out the swap lines, we are in minus $50 billion of negative reserve. If I add to the $215 billion, mean that we need more than $260 billion to finance this year. And it's not gonna be easy. Of course, the other main problem in Turkey, I think the main economic problem is the inflation. The inflation rate is at 14.60% today, but the first quarter, I expect the inflation to go to more than 16%, especially because of January, very high increase price starting at the beginning of the year. And of course, lot of increase, more demand, and maybe 16-17% of inflation. I think we're gonna stop at 16, means that we're gonna have one or more, but I think one in January or in February interest rate increase. The interest rate is at 17%. Maybe we're gonna have 100 basis points, another one increase. And first quarter is very bad for the Turkish economy. I think we're gonna go to the recession for the first quarter. The second quarter will depend of what dear Soli Özel said about our relations with US and Europe. And because we are in a need of external financing, the relationship with our partners will be very, very crucial for the second quarter. And I think at the second part of the year, if we don't have an external currency shock, I think we're gonna have a decreasing inflation, means that we're gonna maybe start to lower interest rate in the second half of this year. Just if you want, I will be happy to stop and try to take a lot of questions and just try to summarize. Thank you to listening to me.
Thank you, Murat. Thank you. Again, very clear and very short summary of global and Turkish economy. We have two questions direct to Mr. Özel at the moment. Maybe I can start with that.
And you had my S400 questions.
Okay. So Ömer Faruk is asking, relieving from a self-exceptionalism, do you think this enlightenment tamed the Uncle Sam here after when they pragmatically support which movements on board?
We don't hear you.
Michael.
I didn't quite understand the question, but if the question is, will this reckoning with the fact that it's no longer an exceptional country tame American foreign policy, is that the question?
I mean, I just said possibly.
Türkçe sorsun arkadaş. Ben anlamadım çünkü soruyu.
Okay, Ömer Faruk, maybe we can review the question. Then I can switch to Uğur Temur. Is another question. Good evening, everyone. I would like to ask a question, which is related to the effect of this action to the other countries in terms of working system of democracy. Does it give rise to autocracy?
Well, there is now a burgeoning literature on how democracies are in peril. Although lots of democracies did well during the pandemic and lots of authoritarian regimes did awful during the pandemic, the fact that China, where it all started, actually managed to put it under control relatively quickly, and it will be the only country that with a positive rate of growth this year, somehow makes Chinese-style capitalism, state capitalism, and Chinese-style governance, that is authoritarianism, look more successful and therefore more attractive to imitate. And democracies have been worn out both by their domestic problems and by their lack of good performance. And especially with the United States being run by a clown, it didn't really help the image of certainly not the United States and democracies in general. So that's what the restoration issue is. But everywhere, democracies themselves are under attack by their own populist forces. If you want to put it in a more it's not that if in a broader framework, the answer to the question of whether or not democracies will survive cannot, in my judgment, be answered without raising the question of what to do with the inequalities that the current type of globalization actually generates. Inequality is the #1 issue, and the states are going to be asked to intervene on behalf of the losers of a market-oriented globalization. And without taming big companies, without taming capital, which has been extraordinarily strong in the last 40 years, you really cannot beef up your democratic credentials. Capitalism generates inequality. Democracy is predicated on the formal equality of citizens. And the way to actually balance these two opposite tendencies is for the state to intervene, to redistribute wealth, to tax the wealthy, and then to protect the ones who need protection. That has been done away with, and that has generated the economic basis of the populist wave. You'll have to deal with that. If that is managed, as I think the Biden administration will try to, I don't know whether it will succeed, and elsewhere this will also be tried, then democracies will come back. Look, I think one of the richest people in China, the owner of Alibaba, Jack Ma, he hasn't been seen in public for 3 goddamn weeks. The man cannot even be present in his own television show. For some reason, the Chinese regime basically decided to actually cross him out. He has, so with all the zillions of dollars that he has no protection.
Yeah, very right.
And that, by the way, in terms of democracies, and another fight, another struggle is going to be, what do we do with technology companies? I mean, I am delighted that Twitter and Facebook banned Trump for life from using their platforms. That's too, okay, but in principle, that is too much power given to 2 companies who are, at least Facebook is a hateful company. Mark Zuckerberg should never have that kind of power. So in a way, the way we're moving into the 21st century, and the 21st century is actually taking us towards a world which is somewhere in between an Orwellian world and a Huxleyan world. How do we maintain our space for our political action as citizens? Do we even keep the concept of citizenship under such circumstances? So it goes way beyond a simple contestation between an authoritarian and a democratic system. So this decade will give us answers about that. And quite frankly, the fact that there was a wave of exits from WhatsApp because they were going to share our data with the parent company, Facebook, and people flocked to other companies, gave me some hope that maybe we're coming to the end of this blind obedience. Okay, let them, we are all exhibitionists nowadays anyway, let them use our data, it doesn't really matter. Maybe this is a recognition that maybe, no, we should not let our data be used by whomever, and that they should not have that kind of power over us. Refik Hoca has a question for Murat.
Yes. Okay. Refik Hoca has the following question, Murat. He says that what happens as the foreign, where will be the foreign funds coming so that interest rate will be lowered into the second half of this year? So in other words, I mean, they keep coming even after the low interest rate, I guess. That's Professor Erzan's question.
Okay, I told in my presentation that the money is coming is a very hot money, and there's very, short term, and there are some hedge funds, there's some mutual funds, and there are some trading funds, and I work with this company in US and in France, and they are very short funds, and they can stay 1 month, 2 months, but they're not long-term money. These funds who are coming, they don't care what's happening in Boğaziçi University. They don't care if the European judiciary system, if Turkey doesn't follow the rule, whatever. They only care about making money. And Turkey, with its 14-15% of interest rate for bond market, it's very attractive. And maybe you know there's more than $17 trillion who are invested in the nominal negative rates. And Turkey is one of the countries who's giving a very important interest rate. It's one of the 10 best countries, meaning of very high interest rate. It's why these funds, I think they're gonna continue to come to Turkey, maybe until the second quarter, and they're gonna see what's happening, especially with US, with Europe, geopolitical, whatever. And of course, if in the second half of the year we start to lower interest rate, and means that the Turkish market will be less attractive than it was at the beginning of this year. But we have to also to remember that the last 2 months, a lot of things changed. Starting with we changed the Minister of Finance, and we start to be in more orthodox policies. And we cancel the active ratio. We changed the rules about swap, and all these orthodox rules that the money like it. And of course, I think I said it in my presentation that we have still accommodative policies and quantitative easing from US and European and Japanese central banks, means that we have a lot of liquidity, and Turkey is a very attractive market. But I want to remind, this is short-term money, not long-term.
Thank you. Let me read the previous question that I couldn't read very well, and now he is reading the Turkish one. Self-exceptionalism, sanrısından kurtulmanın yarattığı farkındalık. Sam amca için bundan sonraki halk hareketlerini pragmatik bir şekilde destekleme noktasında terbiye edici bir rol oynar mı?
Çok güzel soru.
As complicated as English.
Look, the end of American exceptionalism, or the American exceptionalism myth, I think was more a myth for the elites in the United States than it was for the public. And to the extent that this exceptionalism led, for good or bad intentions, to interventions, military interventions everywhere, that actually ended with the colossal failures in both Afghanistan and Iraq. So one good thing, one thing about Trump that one has to accept, he did not want war, because people who elected him did not want war, because it's their children who go out and die. Therefore, the elites have lost their grip on the American public's imagination for a whole set of reasons, mainly economic perhaps, but they also lost their prestige because of the ill-fated, ill-thought-out choices in American foreign policy. And it's not just the invasion of Iraq or the intervention in Afghanistan that lasted far too long. Also the choice of free trade and the choice of a particular type of globalization without giving a safety net to those who would become the losers of such a process. Therefore, in that sense, military intervention, I don't believe will be high on the agenda of the United States unless its vital interests are being threatened, and are being threatened directly by a challenger. Will this also lead for the United States to actually support worthy causes in the world, or at least not to block them? I really doubt that the United States is going to be intervening much anywhere for any reason. Therefore, in every country, that includes Turkey, we're going to be basically on our own. All that other countries' populations can ask is that the US does not tip the scales in favor of the forces of autocracy that are fighting the aspiring democratic forces in any given country. They will not do anything in Hong Kong. Because intervention, it's not just military intervention, they just will not do anything in places where they believe they do not have a core interest. So it is a period of retrenchment for the United States, which actually began under Obama. In that sense, there was a lot of continuity, not in style, but in substance between Obama and Trump. And Biden will continue this because we will see, in spite of the fact that the Biden administration will try to rebuild the relations with Europe, it will also begin to move away or will demand that Europe take more of the burden of collective security. It will be withdrawing slowly but surely from the Middle East. It doesn't need the Middle East. The Middle East has given them, the United States, nothing but grievance. Now, the United States gave more grievance to the Middle East, by the way. I mean, they have destroyed an order, they haven't replaced it with another order, and we ended up holding the bag as people who live in this region. Sectarianism, Iranian expansionism, Sunni Shia, the radicalization of Sunni Shia fights, and the fact that the Arab revolts, which were for dignity and governance, have turned into failures, not because of the United States, but for a whole set of reasons. All of that given rise to organizations of nihilistic violence, such as ISIS. All of those problems remain in place, and the United States is going to try to wash its hands of it. And I don't see the region's rulers responding to all the problems that were there 10 years ago that are still there in ways that the people who have risen 10 years ago have demanded. So we're going to be in for a lot of problems in the regions that surround us. I doubt that the United States would lift a finger. They won't do anything. So again, I've been thinking that for a long time. We are on our own, whatever we want to do. Mainly we have to do on our own. All we can ask is for others not to tip the balance, the scales against those who want a better governance system in their countries.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
S-400s.
Yeah, yeah, S-400, because it all will depend. If you are the president of Turkey, how do you solve the S-400 issue?
Well, the thing is, there are so many decisions that were made about S-400s that are incomprehensible for ordinary mortals like myself. Why did we have to buy them?
Okay.
Number one. Secondly, I mean, there are a lot of evil Republicans around in the Senate. One of them, of course, was the former Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. And the other one is Lindsey Graham. You really don't want to be on the wrong side of Lindsey Graham, all right?
Okay.
So the Turkish government actually promised Lindsey Graham, who brokered the deal between the Turkish government and the Trump administration, that Turkey would not unpack the S-400s, okay? That was the deal. And so long as you did not unpack them, then Congress could be told that, you know, Turkey was actually not going to be using those. So what did Turkey do? In November, I think.
Yeah, it was November.
400s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, why would you want to break your word to someone like Lindsey Graham, who is vengeful and would not really stomach this sitting down? Anyway, and now the Congress is not satisfied, will not be satisfied, it says, for the S-400s to remain in the boxes, it wants them out of Turkish territory. So the question is, we will probably promise again that we will not use them, and we will find ways of verifying that they will not be taken out of the boxes. But if that doesn't turn out to be enough, is there a place where Turkey can actually send the S-400s? Will Azerbaijan get them? I don't know. But that's the big point of negotiation between the Biden administration and the Turkish government. I mean, our guys are like, act as if they have the upper hand. They don't, unfortunately. And we didn't really have to be in such dire straits either. I mean, we've done it all. So that's one way out. And if Biden can be assured that the boxes will not be opened, and if he can then convince Congress that there will be verification measures, and that Congress need not worry, and if he can prevail over Congress saying, look, Turkey is too important, we can deal with them later on, then we can move on. And then, of course, there will be talks about Turkey, US, PYD in Syria, and God knows what else. By the way, yes, Turkey has been very close to Russia. We have this wonderful love affair and stuff, but Turkey is helping the Ukraine, major way. There are co-productions with the Ukraine. Therefore, the Russians cannot be happy with the way Turkey is actually getting closer and closer with the Ukraine. Turkey is also very cooperative with the Americans and other littoral states in the Black Sea, not to leave the Black Sea all to the Russians, and the Russians should not like that either. And in spite of the fact that, yes, the Russia was a winner on the Caucasus, but Turkey has now gotten a foothold in the Caucasus. So a lot of the things that Turkey does to the north of the border actually are against Russia's interests. But Turkey fears the south, and in the south, it does not trust its Western partners, and therefore it cooperates with Russia. And it's an interesting balancing act between the two of them. Can this be continued forever? I doubt it, and I don't think so. But the way we handle our relations with the United States will also determine how Turkish-EU relations, Turkey-EU relations are going to go. The EU, in my judgment, in a shameful act, said, okay, we'll wait for 3 months and see what the Biden administration is going to do with Turkey, and then we'll decide whether or not we will impose sanctions on Turkey or how we're going to treat Turkey. It's escapism. And we'll see what they will do. But the EU has not uttered the words accession country for Turkey in 2 years now. They have not said a thing about Turkey's deteriorating democratic order, rule of law, non-independence of the judiciary, the fact that we don't abide by what our constitution stipulates. That is, if the European Court of Human Rights makes a decision, we are actually duty-bound or legally bound to implement it, and we just say no, that doesn't concern us, and not a peep from them. That's and in that way, it actually shows they have no longer any moral authority left on Turkey. But it also shows that strategically they cannot get themselves to actually act in unison. So the United States will determine how Turkey's relations with the allies are going to be framed from now on. So that will be a function of the decisions on the part of those in charge of Turkey policy in the United States. Do they want to appease Turkey or pressure Turkey to behave in a certain way? We don't know yet. We will see. All I know is that many of the people who are now who are going to be serving in the Biden administration know Turkey well.
There are two questions. Maybe there are two questions relevant to what you're saying. Can I immediately?
Sure.
Yeah. One of them is Dinçer. He says that how do you think Turkey's effort to mend relations with EU-US affect balance of power within the ruling AKP MHP coalition? and its effect on the markets. Okay, but the first one is enough. Then maybe I can. So it
Look,
maybe it's
if Turkey's relations with the EU get better, and they are not better just seasonally, but structurally, obviously this will be a boon to the entry of not hot money, but also
Exactly.
investment money. And the question is very pertinent. The domestic coalition that rules the country today cannot accept this. I mean, you cannot, on the one hand, be kissy-kissy with the European Union, repeat that we are dying to become a member of the European Union, this is our destiny, and then domestically do everything that counters whatever principles and values that exist in the European Union. So that contradictory act, in my judgment, cannot be continued indefinitely. Where it will break remains to be seen, but it doesn't look like they're going to relent domestically in order to actually bring Turkey's domestic order on a par with what a candidate country ought to look like. So I don't know how long they're going to continue with that. And whether or not this will break our relay. You see, they've got to test if Turkey's strategic importance, as has been the case in history, trumps other considerations. And they basically say, okay, this is Turkey, they cannot do any better, we'll deal with the Turkey that exists rather than the Turkey we would want to see. And if that is the message, then our guys can actually do and make a lot of concessions to both the Europeans and the Americans, not change a thing domestically. And now, what does that do to the democracy agenda of Biden and or the validity of that agenda? And what does that do to the principles and values of the European Union? That's another question.
There was one quick question as well from Okan Bahşiş, and what Mr. Bahşiş says that it seems US will use Chinese treatment of Uyghurs as a way of putting pressure on China. Based on this, how do you see the position of Turkey with China, consequences of this Turkish domestic politics?
The thing is, I really don't think the United States has that kind of leverage over China any longer, Uyghurs or no Uyghurs. I mean, the Chinese have been doing unspeakable things to the Uyghurs, you know, forcing women to marry the Chinese, putting them in concentration camps, the re-education camps, which are brainwashing places. And the Turkish government, whose two coalition partners, one is Islamist and the other is Turkist, is mum. That says enough about the principles and values that our government upholds. It's basically opportunism or pragmatism, whichever word you want to use. And they haven't shown even a hundredth of the consideration that they show for anything that happens to Muslims, especially in the Western world, for what is happening to the Uyghurs in China. That's, in my judgment, it's shameful, but that's life.
And a question from Cumhur Bilgili, he asks, maybe it's in Turkish though, Obama hükümetinin Orta Doğu politikasını düşündüğümüzde Biden hükümetinin tekrar demokrasi, ılımlılık ve işbirliği anlamında farklı olacağını düşünmek biraz iyimser olmuyor mu?
Ben Orta Doğu'da şu olacak bu olacak diye bir şey söylemedim. Biden hükümetinin Çin'den pardon, I didn't say anything about what they would do in the Middle East. First of all, the illusion of, you know, moderate Islam, maybe we can reconcile Islamists with democracy. That's gone. And the Biden administration or any other American administration couldn't care less about whether or not Middle Eastern countries are democratic. It's going to be geopolitics, and for geopolitics, there is only, of the region, there is only one question, and that is what to do with Iran. And Turkey will have to actually position itself accordingly as well. Now, and what I said was that Biden administration will have to distinguish itself or differentiate itself from China by emphasizing democratic governance. But it will be democratic governance as a success story in those countries that are already democratic, and it will not try to impose democratic regimes in the Middle East. There will be problems. For instance, and this will be my last word because I need to go. If, let's say, they convene a summit of democratic countries or a summit of democracies or a democracy summit, do you invite India or don't you invite India? You cannot not invite India because India is going to be your main partner against China in Asia. But India, as it is being run by Modi, is not an ideal democratic country. Do you invite Turkey? Okay. What if you invite Poland or Hungary? I mean, are they really democratic countries? So the issue of values and principles in international relations is a very tricky one, because those principles and values do not always match the interests you have, and you have to make decisions which then make you look hypocritical, which is what had happened to the United States for a long, long time. Okay. I have to go. Thank you very much for having me.
I think we're going to end it stand. There's no more questions. Burak Hoca, it's okay.
Question, but maybe we can leave Mr. Özel. Okay, he left already.
He left already. Okay, I will take the last 1-2 questions.
Yes, there is one question for me. If any more we can ask. Bora, the one I asked the question, he said that what happens if 10 years, possibly US Treasury, he means, goes on like that, how would it affect the markets?
Okay. It started last week. The treasuries went from 0.8 to more than 1.1%. Especially what happened last week in US. I said today we're making a YouTube with Artur Koca Balkan every week. And it was asked from him, and I said I think it's gonna be short term. I don't expect that to be a trend. Of course, if it's becoming a trend, it will be very harmful for the market, very bad for the market, and I think it's more short term action.
Okay. Any more questions for Murat, Sağman?
I wanted to ask also, add something about Europe when I said I talk about the US, but also Europe, of course, Soli had more question because all the economic issue are depending of the relation that we're going to have with the US and with Europe starting in February, I think. And also in Europe, if we had some problem starting in March for Europe, of course, economically, we will have some major problems. I can tell you 3 numbers. Still 70% of direct investments are coming from European companies. And we have 65% of all the total banking financing from European banks. And also 50% of our exports are going to Europe. They are our main partner. It's why if we have a breakout in February of March with US and also with Europe, we're going to have a very bad economical condition. It's why all depends of the relation we're going to have with Europe and US. And maybe it's my last words if there's no any more questions.
Any more questions? If not any more questions, then maybe we would also thank to Murat Sağman for his very energetic talk.
Thank you.
Possibly see you next semester then for other seminar. But again, thanks for Murat for helping in organization as well. Not only
of course, I invited Soli. It's a very good friend of mine and very good in his this political, geopolitical talking. And very happy to talk to you, and especially Boğaziçi University. The last year, my last panel was with Boğaziçi University, and this year my first panel is with Boğaziçi University. As I told you, last week was a historical week for US and also for Boğaziçi. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice evening. Thank you. Bye bye.
Evet, herkese teşekkürler.
Teşekkürler lütfen.
Teşekkürler herkese.
Yayını kapatıyorum.
Görüşmek üzere.
Hoşça kalın.
akşamlar.
İyi akşamlar.
Thank you.
Thank you. İyi akşamlar.
Thank you. Bye.